On this Monday night, calling it quits. Ontario's housing minister resigns from his cabinet post over the Greenbelt controversy, what it now means for Premier Doug Ford.
Do the right thing and roll back this really dirty deal.
Escaping the muddy and miserable mess that became Burning Man.
This is a disaster.
The scramble for drivers and those fleeing on foot. A Canadian soldier's new mission, her powerful message to survivors of military misconduct. And Ukraine's defense minister gets dumped. The allegations his department faced.
Global National with Donna Friesen. Reporting tonight, Nitu Garcha.
Good evening and thank you for joining us. After weeks of pushback, Ontario Housing Minister Steve Clark has announced he's resigning from cabinet. There have been two scathing reports from the province's Integrity Commissioner and Auditor General over the development of the province's Greenbelt lands. Clark had initially vowed to stay on despite the controversy, but after an emergency caucus meeting this afternoon, he's now been replaced. And questions still remain about what will happen to the land. Mackenzie Gray has our top story tonight.
A Labor Day resignation from one of Ontario's most embattled politicians. In a letter posted to his Twitter account, Steve Clark acknowledging his role in the Greenbelt scandal takes away from the housing emergency. This crisis demands someone who's not a distraction from the important work that needs to be done, Clark said. As someone who has given my life to serving the people through our democratic institutions, it is my responsibility to adhere to the principle of ministerial accountability.
I think they were just delaying the inevitable. The right thing to do would have been for him to resign.
But ministerial accountability didn't appear to be a concern for Clark on Thursday when he resisted calls for his resignation as housing minister, despite showing some contrition.
I want to make it very clear to Ontarians that I'm sorry that we didn't do a better job and that I personally didn't do a better job in terms of the oversight.
Last week, Ontario's Integrity Commissioner found that Clark was tasked with deciding which lands to remove from protected space outside of Toronto, called the Greenbelt, to be rezoned for housing construction. The report revealed Clark was reluctant and stuck his head in the sand, deferring responsibility to his chief of staff, Ryan Amato, who is now also resigned. The commissioner also finding the process gave developers direct input on which lands to select, with the Ontario Auditor General saying they stood to make over $8 billion from the deal.
This isn't end here. It's going to keep going. The RCMP is considering whether to lay charges, and we'll see.
Ontario Premier Doug Ford had backed Clark.
I have confidence in Minister Clark. He has a big file.
But now has installed Paul Calandra as the new housing minister. Ford also held an emergency caucus meeting this afternoon, with one Progressive Conservative member saying the government caucus has been left reeling by Clark's resignation.
Our mandate is to build homes.
Despite the scandal, Ford has vowed to push forward with his government's plan to build homes on the Greenbelt lands.
This is a counterproductive policy. It's a dirty policy from root to stem.
Clark's resignation as a minister will give him more time to handle any legal consequences. With the Toronto Star reporting, Nithu, he's hired outside legal counsel.
All right, Mackenzie Gray in Ottawa tonight. Thanks, Mackenzie. A heat warning is in effect for much of southern Ontario, including the Greater Toronto area. Temperatures could hit between 30 and 34 degrees over the next several days, with the humidex making it feel closer to 40. Environment Canada says this extreme heat is atypical for September. Hot and humid conditions are expected to ease on Thursday when a cold front moves through the region. Heading west now, wildfire smoke is putting a chokehold over millions of Canadians tonight. Special air quality statements are in effect for multiple cities, including Edmonton, Calgary, Regina, and Saskatoon. There were worries the smoke could cancel the CFL's annual Battle of Alberta, but the game has gone ahead as planned. There's some positive news about the wildfire situation in the Northwest Territories. Essential workers began returning to Yellowknife today. They will prepare healthcare, grocery, and emergency services ahead of the expected return of residents on Wednesday. The city of 20,000 people was evacuated 3 weeks ago when unprecedented wildfires encroached on the community. In Saskatchewan, a grim anniversary for those living in James Smith Cree Nation and Weldon. Today marks 1 year since Myles Sanderson went on a deadly stabbing spree. And as friends and families mourn the loved ones they lost, they're also lamenting how it could have been avoided. As Nathaniel Dove explains, the tragedy has put a spotlight on systemic failures Indigenous communities have had to endure.
The system has failed us.
1 year earlier,
A massacre. 11 people killed and 17 injured at James Smith Cree Nation and in nearby Weldon, Saskatchewan. The chief, blunt on the failure he says caused it.
If we were warned a year in advance on how he was released, we would have caught on to this.
Many in the community very clear on what they believe led to the violence.
Residential school, abuses, alcoholism, discrimination, it all combines and drives people to do awful things.
Acknowledged and accepted by the federal Indigenous Services Minister.
This didn't happen by accident. This happened as a byproduct of generations of families being similarly inflicted with loss and grief and trauma.
Ottawa has promised to help, pledging millions of dollars for a treatment center and to start a First Nations police service to respond faster. The Indigenous Services Minister saying it's urgent, but gave no new commitments on Monday and no new timelines. Meanwhile, the community is still grieving.
We just finished celebrating our 10th year anniversary on August 31st, so 4 days after that he passed away.
Sky Sanderson's husband Damien was one of the first to die. The James Smith Cree community welcomed media at previous events, not Monday. The spokesperson telling Global News this is the first time some members have returned since the attacks. They're traumatized and many feel afraid. Joyce Burns is one of the survivors.
I don't feel comfortable when somebody comes driving late at night and our door is not very secure.
What is clear 1 year on is that a year is not enough, not to change what the community says caused the violence and not to recover.
My kids miss him so much, and then I miss him so much too because he wasn't supposed to leave me.
Nathaniel Dove, Global News, Toronto.
After heavy rains trapped tens of thousands in Nevada's remote Black Rock Desert, many attendees of this year's Burning Man Festival are getting out. Conditions have improved enough for a mass exodus. Jennifer Johnson reports on the flood of people desperate for dry ground.
And we get the sun.
The weather has cleared. The gates have been reopened. We did it! And the end to a weekend-long nightmare is near. Tens of thousands of Burning Man Festival goers are slowly getting out to get on with their lives.
I think a lot of us new people didn't actually realize if the rain does get bad, you can't leave. That never even crossed a lot of our minds.
More than 70,000 attendees were told to shelter in place and ration supplies after downpours flooded the region, closing roads, creating ankle-deep muck, and leaving porta potties unusable.
We're out here with a solid group of veteran burners. Some people have been doing this for 20 years, and we've never seen anything like this.
This is our attempt to flee.
But the sludge didn't stop some from making the treacherous 9-kilometer trek out of the campground to passable roads, despite the dangers, including Bear Kate and his wife, who needed to get home to their children.
We took everything we needed to survive on our backs. There were actually rivers that were flooding through the playa where we had to test and see how deep they were. My wife was carried across the river by a very strong man.
The local sheriff's department is investigating the death of one man in his 40s.
Bicycle can't move anymore.
Muddy Burning Man.
The Counterculture annual gathering, held about 177 kilometers north of Reno, has never experienced such downpours. Dust storms cause previous interruptions. Those with RVs and trailers will still have to wait for the sludge to dry before getting out.
I think I could be trapped here for a couple more days.
Those still stuck are hoping the weather will be clear enough for the annual Burn the Man finale, the symbolic burning of a large wooden effigy, which attendees then have to clean up in the mess Mother Nature has already caused. Jennifer Johnson, Global News, Washington.
In Taiwan, dozens have been injured after Typhoon Haikui tore across the island. The storm made landfall yesterday, uprooting trees and cutting off power to more than 160,000 homes. But despite wind gusts reaching 200 kilometers per hour, there were no reported deaths or any significant structural damage. Businesses and schools remained closed today, while domestic flights and ferry service to nearby islands were canceled. It's the first major storm to hit Taiwan directly in 4 years. Torrential rains have killed at least 3 people and caused widespread damage in central Spain. Roads, subway lines, and high-speed trains were shut down after record rainfall caused heavy flooding. Half a dozen bridges near Madrid were ripped down by overflowing riverbanks. Residents were even warned not to go outside or drive because of the flooding. The situation has improved since yesterday, with the National Weather Agency lowering its alert level for the region from red to yellow. The music world is in mourning. Steve Harwell, the former frontman of the popular rock band Smash Mouth, has died at the age of 56.
Hey now, you're an all-star. Get your game on, go play.
According to the band's manager, Harwell died in his Idaho home surrounded by friends and family. He had been in hospice care due to complications from liver failure. Harwell co-founded Smash Mouth in 1994 and struggled with alcoholism. He eventually retired in 2021 due to health issues. And singer-songwriter Gary Wright has also died. He was best known as leader of the UK-based band Spooky Tooth and for the back-to-back 1976 solo hits Dreamweaver and Love Is Alive. Wright had a long battle with Parkinson's and dementia. He was 80 years old. Ukraine's critical shakeup in a time of war. Coming up, why the man who oversaw the country's defenses is out of the job. Days before the G20 summit kicks off in Delhi, China's leader is ducking out of the important gathering. China's foreign ministry confirmed President Xi Jinping will be absent from the summit for the first time since it began in 2008. A delegation led by the country's premier will attend instead. The reasons for Xi's absence are unclear, but China and India are embroiled in a border dispute over the Himalayan region. Russian President Vladimir Putin also won't be attending, with the war in Ukraine expected to remain a key issue at the summit. In Ukraine, a Russian drone strike damaged warehouses at a grain port in Odessa. The attack set buildings on fire hours before talks between the Russian and Turkish presidents. Vladimir Putin says the deal that allowed for the export of Ukrainian grain through the Black Sea won't be restored until the West helps facilitate Russian agricultural exports. Ports in the Odessa region have come under heavy fire by Russia since the collapse of the Black Sea grain deal in July. Less than 24 hours after Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky revealed plans to replace his defense minister, Oleksiy Reznikov tendered his resignation. He posted a photo and letter on social media saying it was an honor to serve the Ukrainian people. It is a major shakeup happening at a critical time in the war. Crystal Gamansing reports on why now and who will replace him.
Oleksiy Reznikov forged bonds with Canadian ministers and those of allied nations over the last 558 days of Russia's full invasion. Now Ukraine's charismatic defense minister is out. He must be held accountable for what he has done while holding the position of defense minister, says this soldier in Kyiv. Reznikov has not been named directly, but allegations of corruption, including military recruitment officers taking bribes and mismanagement of funds, have plagued the Defense Department. The Ukrainian president was elected on an anti-corruption platform. On Sunday, he said the ministry needed a new approach. This international relations professor says the president had to act.
But now there has been a congruence of factors increasing dissatisfaction in the West, particularly in the United States, and especially in the case of the Republican Party, as to how the vast funds that are being sent to support Ukraine are being spent.
Rustem Umerov is the replacement and is seen as clean, with no links to corruption, and is a Crimean Tatar.
It's a way for Mr. Zelensky to reach out to the Islamic world and say, we are fighting a battle that is against imperialism, that is directed against Ukraine as a country, but also one that is denying the right of the Tatar minority, the Muslim minority.
With Umerov tapped as the new defense minister, it could also be taken as a sign that Ukraine will not give up the fight to reclaim Crimea. Crystal Gamansing, Global News, London.
Still ahead, the lifeline blocked for tens of thousands of Armenians living in Azerbaijan. The government of the mostly ethnic Armenian enclave of Nagorno-Karabakh says the blockade of a road enforced by Azerbaijan has become a humanitarian disaster. It started in December and has led to shortages of food, fuel, and medicine in the region. Nagorno-Karabakh is internationally recognized as part of Azerbaijan, but since the end of the Soviet Union, much of it has been autonomous and closely allied to Armenia. Since an armed conflict in the region in 2020, Russia has played an important peacekeeping role there. But Armenia's prime minister now says that relying on Moscow was a mistake. Redmond Shannon reports.
These are the empty store shelves of Nagorno-Karabakh, with little hope for new deliveries anytime soon. Video from its public broadcaster illustrating what residents say is part of a deliberate plan by Azerbaijan leadership to starve people out.
There is no egg, there is no chicken, there is no milk and dairy. In hospitals, we have already serious shortage of life-saving medication.
For most of the summer, almost all of the traffic into the mostly ethnic Armenian enclave, also known as Artsakh, has been blocked. Azerbaijan says the blockade is to prevent shipments of arms from Armenia, which has relied on support from Russia. During the fighting in 2020, Azerbaijan retook control of territories in and around Nagorno-Karabakh. It meant the remaining ethnic Armenian-controlled land was surrounded and needed a special corridor to link it to Armenia. In the peace deal that followed, Russia was a guarantor of what's become known as the Lashin Corridor. Armenia's prime minister now says involving Moscow was a strategic mistake, with Vladimir Putin's concentration focused on Ukraine.
We feel that the Artsakh problem is not getting the attention it deserves.
Azerbaijan refutes allegations it's to blame for the suffering here and denies trying to starve the ethnic Armenian population.
The government of Azerbaijan is strongly committed to guarantee and secure the access of these residents to the necessary goods and establishing appropriate living conditions for them.
Azerbaijan says it has offered an alternate trade route from within its borders, but those inside Nagorno-Karabakh fear a trap that could lead to a takeover.
It will be an attempt to impose your political will through this seemingly humanitarian measure. No, this is a complete manipulation.
Armenia and Nagorno-Karabakh are now pivoting from Moscow to the west for help. This a smaller conflict in the shadow of a war in Ukraine, but one that's all too real for the tens of thousands living it. Redmond Shannon, Global News, London.
Soldiering on. Next, I speak with a Canadian servicewoman about her inspiration to compete in the Invictus Games. Hundreds of servicemen and women from 21 different countries are heading to Germany this week, where the Invictus Games are set to kick off. The international sporting event was founded by Prince Harry in 2014, created for wounded and ill military personnel and veterans. Joining us is Major Joanna Labonte, who's among more than 30 Canadian soldiers competing in this year's edition. Major Labonte, thank you for joining us. First of all, what motivated you to apply to the Invictus Games, and what does it mean to you to be going?
Well, what motivated me to apply was the Soldier On program, which is across the country in Canada, offering sports and creative activities for military members and veterans to just find their way and find some hope and find some opportunity through sport. And I was able to take part in that, and it's changed my life. You know, I was encouraged to sign up for the Invictus Games, and I was so honored to be selected.
I understand you also have a son. As a role model, how do you think your attendance at the Games will inspire young people?
Well, the Invictus Games is comprised of over 500 athletes from around the world. We have 31 Canadian members going to the Games, and we are from across the country. So youth across the country are going to see us competing on an international stage. I'm sure it will inspire others. I'm sure youth will be engaged and want to also find opportunities in sport and recreation.
Now, I understand your career has spanned more than 30 years. You had to step up for a range of posts in that time. This is a pretty unique one. What has preparation for these games looked like for you?
Well, it started once we knew we were selected in November, and then we've gone to 2 different training camps in Canada where we got to bond with our teammates, learn new sports. I'm doing discus and shot put, something I've never done before, and I've fallen in love with these sports. It's an amazing opportunity to learn something new and to find some hope, you know, and to look to fitness and healthy living as a way forward for me after I medically released from the Canadian Armed Forces.
With the utmost sensitivity, I also wanted to ask, because you were among, I believe, 4 women on the Canadian team who've mentioned military sexual trauma in your bio. What message do you hope your participation on the international stage in this way will send?
Military sexual trauma is a very difficult thing to maneuver through. To come forward and disclose such a sensitive thing has been a real challenge for me. And in fact, in the end, it's why I'm releasing from the Canadian Armed Forces. But I don't look at that as the end. I look at it as the beginning, an opportunity to move forward, to figure out what's next for me and how I can maybe, hopefully, inspire other military sexual trauma survivors to know that there's opportunities for them in the future, that they have opportunities to really thrive in their lives.
And that is indeed a very powerful message. Major Joanna Labonte, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
And that is Global National for this Monday night. I'm Neetu Garcha. Tonight's Your Canada is downtown Edmonton. We love seeing your Canada. Please keep emailing your photos to viewers@globalnational.com. Thanks for watching. Donna will be back with you tomorrow. Have a great night.